Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. After Raj Chetty or Dr. Chetty's presentation, I'm really excited to have this conversation because it connects really well. I left that last conversation continuing to think about what I think about a lot, which is how do we make sure every student has a teacher in front of them that can give them what they need to be successful. And it was very clear from that last conversation that whether you come to this issue from a perspective of educational justice or educational equity or opportunity, or are concerned about the future of our nation's economy, this issue will matter to you, which is how do we get great teachers into all of our classrooms and in front of all of our kids. So my name is Evan Stone. I am the co-founder and co-CEO of an organization called Educators for Excellence that I'll tell you more about in a second. And I'm also a former 6th grade teacher, where I launched my organization that I now run out of my classroom in the Bronx. The way we're going to run this conversation is in a second I'm going to introduce the really distinguished panelists that are up here with me today that I can't wait to learn from and with. Then I'm going to give some framing remarks to this, and then each of us will talk for about 5 minutes to share a little bit about our perspective on how we get great teachers in front of kids. And then we're going to have a conversation. We'll ask each other a few questions, and then we'll open it up to the room. So please be prepared to ask questions. My least favorite thing as a teacher was when I would open it up to the classroom and everybody would stare at me blankly. So I don't want to relive that today. Please help me prevent that if we can, because we really want to engage with you, hear what the conditions are in your states, what the challenges you're looking at are, and hopefully we can be helpful. So without further delay, I'll introduce our panelists. So next to me is Tequila Brownie, who's the Executive Vice President of the client team at TNTP, which does amazing work both on teacher preparation and in consulting and supporting school districts and states around the country to improve their systems. Next to her is Pat Youngpredit, who's the Chief Academic Officer of Codeorg, which is working to help teachers develop and train teachers around computer science. And next to him is Megan Cloud, who's the Director of Professional Development at Vail School District in Arizona, which is embarking and is almost 2 years into, a really innovative experiment around teacher preparation that I can't wait to learn about myself. So thank you all for being here. So why are we in this room today? We're all here because after decades of research, some of which we just saw, the evidence is resounding that having a great teacher matters a ton. In fact, it's the single most important in-school factor in student achievement. And we know that, and we've known that for some time, yet we still fail to get great teachers into every classroom, and we particularly fail to distribute our effective teachers equitably across our school districts, across our states, and across our nation. We know that teachers in the top quartile, and we just saw some of this, can achieve a year or more greater learning gains for students than teachers in the bottom quartile. And I don't think anybody would disagree with the importance of getting teachers in front of kids, getting great teachers in front of kids. But the question is, how do we do that? What do we need to change? Well, at Educators for Excellence, we now work with a little over 30,000 teachers across the country to ask them what they think the solutions are to the vexing problems in education policy. And recently, we did some national survey work of teachers across the country and asked them the same thing. And what we've heard from educators, from practitioners themselves, is there are 5 key buckets that they think need to change to make teaching attractive, to help prepare and help train teachers to be great. And I'll share those with you. And I think some of them will overlap with what we're going to hear later, and some of them will be a little different. But the first is around preparation. So what we have heard loud and clear from teachers is that on day one, they do not feel prepared when they enter their classroom. I didn't feel prepared, whether it's through an alternative certification program or a traditional one. Overarching, it's around 65% of teachers are saying they were not prepared. And they're also saying there needs to be easier and more diverse pathways into the profession, particularly to increase the number of teacher candidates of color. An example of that we have seen is some of the alternative certification programs, whether that's Teach for America or Teaching Fellows programs or other urban teacher residency programs, have far higher rates of teachers of color entering the workforce than traditional pathways. And given what we know about how important it is to have a diverse teacher workforce for all students, but particularly students of color, teachers are telling us it needs to be easier to enter the profession, cost less money to get there, and that we still have a high bar to entry that ensures you have deep content knowledge. So we'll talk more about that as we go. The second thing we've heard from teachers is around professional development. Similarly, by and large, teachers are telling us that professional development is not meeting their needs, is not based on their individual areas of growth, is a one-size-fits-all model that has an outside person coming into the building that doesn't know the school community and doesn't know the students. And so what we've heard from teachers is, why is PD outsourced when it could be insourced? Can we use PD as a way to build pathways for great teachers to expand their impact beyond the students in front of them to the classrooms around them? And we've seen some really innovative things happening around the country to create career ladders to allow our great teachers to impact more students. This connects to the third thing, which is around leadership in service of our students. What we've heard loud and clear from teachers is currently, they don't feel like they're able to expand their impact outside of their classroom. That the flat governance structures in schools, where we usually have a principal and a couple assistant principals and then all the rest of the teachers doing the same thing in their own classrooms, doesn't make sense. And that it doesn't attract innovative individuals who want to grow and expand in their roles. And so we're hearing from teachers that they want alternative pathways to develop and expand their impact in their buildings, whether that's becoming a coach or a mentor, whether that's becoming a peer evaluater, a curriculum developer, but that those roles shouldn't pull you entirely out of the classroom. And so in places like Denver, where we're seeing really innovative pipelines for teachers to be able to do that within their school building, are really exciting. The fourth thing that we're hearing about is safety and support for students. So in this recent study that we did, 1/3 of teachers report fearing for their own safety, at least sometimes over the course of the year. And we know that if teachers are fearing for their own safety, that the conditions for our students are far from what they deserve. What we've asked teachers is, how does that shift? And they are not, by and large, most teachers are saying that sort of old school forms of discipline, exclusionary practices of suspensions and expulsions, aren't working for them. Only about 40% of teachers report that those systems work. And what we see is 80% of teachers reporting that systems that are more inclusive and more restorative are what they want to be able to do to support their kids and make schools feel more safe for them. When we ask teachers what they want professional development on, the very top thing is they want to learn how to move away from exclusionary discipline practices towards ones that are more supportive and inclusive. So when we think about PD, that's an area where teachers are craving more and getting less. And then the fifth is pay. Not just more pay, but differentiated pay, but also more pay. Teachers tell us this loud and clear, that salaries are not high enough, that it takes too long to move up salary scales in most places, that moving up those salary scales are not tied to what you do or how you do it. And so we hear teachers saying that they are open and excited about differentiated pay for teaching in our hardest to staff schools, differentiated pay for teaching our hardest to staff subjects where we have shortages across the country, like our high school sciences, like our teaching students with special needs or English language learners. And these are things that most people think most teachers are not in favor of, but actually 80% of teachers want both of those things to be true: differentiated compensation for hard-to-staff schools and hard-to-staff subjects. And we're starting to see even large urban districts with very strong teachers' unions begin to move on these issues. For example, in New York City's newest contract, teachers can earn $5,000 to $8,000 more dollars for teaching in our hardest-to-staff schools, and $8,000 if you're teaching a hard-to-staff subject in those schools. And so that's what teachers are telling us they want, and they're saying that's what will make teaching more attractive, retain great teachers, and hopefully help us recruit more great teachers. Overall, what teachers have told us and what we've seen is there is no silver bullet to this. Those are 5 ideas that have come from educators. But what I do know is that if we don't get this right, the consequences are very, very grave. And so I'm excited to hear from each of you today about your different work to help us get great teachers into the classrooms. So to Kayla, we'll start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your work at TNTP? Where are you seeing examples of success, and what have you learned?
Sure, thank you. I've been with TNTP for about a little over 5 years now. Prior to that, I was actually Executive Director of Teacher Talent in Memphis City Schools, large urban district in the South. And in Memphis, when I was there, I remember a conversation where the head of our teachers union told me that, you know, we shouldn't even think about focusing on teacher effectiveness and teacher diversity because, and this was a quote, no one's knocking down doors to teach these kids. And so, yeah, I had that reaction myself. And so as we started thinking about what we really could do to really drive teacher quality and think about teacher preparation, we actually did make some shifts. And as a district, we went from getting fined by the state for having too many teachers that were not even certified in classrooms to having thousands of applicants come to teach at our door. For the first time, we actually opened schools 100% staffed. It never happened in the school's history. I share that story to say I was born and grew up in the Delta, in the country, and there are a lot of rural districts. I actually grew up in one. But one of the things that we've learned through our work at TNTP is setting a different bar for what we expect is one of the first steps. So in our work at TNTP, we don't settle for that no one's knocking down doors to teach these kids, because we perpetuate, I think, when we do that, we perpetuate, I think, the lack of value and appreciation that we actually experience in our country and the overall profession. I want to share a couple of things from our work here that we've learned at TNTP about just teacher quality and diversity. The first thing that I want to say is that I think you all are the choir here, but I do want to make sure to say that the research has shown us that it does matter when we think about teacher diversity and its impact to student achievement. We've shown that teachers, when they match the same race of the student, they actually are less likely to be suspended. They're more likely to be referred to gifted programs, less likely to be referred for special education, and they actually go on to complete school. And that's important as we think about the trajectory, both of the students themselves in school, but then beyond as well. In our own research, if you've read our latest national report, The Opportunity Myth, I definitely encourage you to check it out if you haven't, on our website, and there's also a pop-up in Salon, I think, 15. But when we look at the race of students, even in our own research, and the race of teachers, one of the big things that we found in our research is this notion of how teacher expectations drives student achievement. So we actually found in our research that when teachers actually share the race of their students, their race or ethnicity, 66% of the time, there is a high expectations. I'll tell you why that matters in a minute. And then when there's not a shared race, you see that about 35% have high expectations. The reason that this is really important, what we found in our research is that we actually surveyed teachers to say, hey, do you believe in rigorous standards? Do you believe in academic achievement for students? And teachers, by and large, 82% say, yes, I believe in college-ready standards. I believe in those. And then when we ask, well, do you expect your kids to achieve against those standards? That number drops down to about 44%. So think about that disconnect. 82% of teachers saying, yes, I believe in rigorous standards, but 44% saying, I expect students to achieve. That translates in our research when we looked at what value does teacher expectations drive towards student achievement. We actually saw for students that start the year behind, students who had access to a teacher that held high expectations for them gained 7.3 more months when compared to students who did not have access to a teacher with high expectations. So again, this is over 7 months of growth in 1 year when the teacher had high expectations for the student compared to not. Why does this even matter? Why am I talking about that now? Because what we saw in our research where the diversity of the teacher pool actually does matter for that variable when you talk about expectations. And so as we think about, like, what do you do there and how do we think about the disparity? How do we disrupt that when we think about our pipeline programs? We know that the actual gap is actually growing larger. Our students are becoming more diverse, and it's likely projected to keep growing. But when we look at the numbers of the diversity of our teachers, it actually is not trending in that same direction. And we know that a lack of the diversity in prep programs it's fueling the problem across the profession. And by that I mean, when we look at the teacher shortage across the country, we say we can't find people to go. One of the things that we've learned at TNTP, we're not tapping, I think, all of the potential sources. So for me, having grown up in the Delta and having an appreciation in coming from Memphis, think about a black middle class or a brown middle class. In Memphis, it was actually fueled, if you will, by educators who were the same race of the teacher. One of the things that we've been thinking about is how do we tap into populations that we've skipped over or that we haven't seen as a potential source for candidates to go into the teaching profession. And one of the things that we've done is focus on that across the country in all of our programs. So kind of getting off the beaten path, if you will, of thinking about where your potential candidates can come from. And the thing that I want to emphasize is that you don't have to sacrifice quality for diversity. I'm not trying to suggest that that is the assumption in the room, but we do quickly get that question, is it an either or? Well, do we focus on diversity or do we focus on quality? And I would argue, and our research and our work has shown us that you can focus on both, focus on diversity without compromising quality, not to suggest that anyone thinks that that's true. Here are the data you can just see from our work in Louisiana, where we actually are seeing, about half of our first-year teachers are actually outperforming some of their peers, and we have actually really improved our diversity in that program. One of the things is you talk about even the barriers. One of the things that we actually have been really focused on and about, like, how do you start to disrupt that? Is to really look at what are those things that are like what are your value propositions? What are you incentivizing in your teacher prep programs? So in a lot of the states we work, there obviously are licensure exams and there's certifications. A lot of research, our own and national research, is suggesting that these exams don't consistently predict teachers' success in the classroom. So that is something to know. We're not saying do away with licensure, but we are suggesting that our current licensure, we should revisit to make sure that they're yielding the outcomes that we want, which is more effective teachers. If there's not a correlation, then that suggests that it's not that valuable of a tool. We should revisit, especially because what we're also finding is that many of these licensure exams are actually disproportionately screening out teachers of color. So here we are, we have a tool that's not correlated to student outcomes, and it's keeping us from getting more diverse teachers, which actually helps with expectations, which does correlate to better outcomes for students. So it's kind of this evolving cycle that is actually continuing to perpetuate our ultimate goal, which is to improve student achievement. So I'll stop here for now, and I know we're going to have more of a discussion as we go through.
Great. So, Pat, if you could tell us a little bit about Code.org and how you guys think about getting teachers ready to teach computer science, whether they were traditionally trained in that or not.
Wonderful. Thank you, Evan. My name is Pat Yon-Pradit, and I used to be a teacher. In fact, just 5 years ago, I was a teacher in Montgomery County Public Schools, Maryland. I was a middle school science teacher and a high school computer science teacher. Raise your hand if you're like Evan. I think, Evan, you're a middle school teacher, right? If you've ever been a middle school teacher, you are a middle school teacher. Okay, all right. All of you, meet me at the bar later. So I was a middle school teacher for 4 years, and I remember that well. So now I'm the Chief Academic Officer at Codeorg. Raise your hand if you've heard of Codeorg. Okay, wonderful. And our CEO, Hadi Partovi, did a keynote last year, and you might have been a part of that. So here's the problem, and computer science education is basically a perfect storm, a perfect context to talk about teacher capacity and meeting the need of teachers, well, meeting the need of high-need areas for teachers. Because computer science obviously is a high-need area, not just in industry, but even more so in education. Think about the delta between what you can make in industry as a computer scientist and then what you can make as a teacher, as a computer science teacher. It's probably the biggest delta of all jobs in education. And so that's just one of the many obstacles, one of the many problems associated with getting computer science teachers. So here are other stats to share with you. There are surveys, numerous surveys. 90% of parents want their child to learn computer science. That was from a Gallup survey. In fact, just released on Monday, Microsoft commissioned a survey by YouGov, and they showed that 88% of teachers believe that learning computer science is fundamental to their students' future success. So there's great demand and appreciation for computer science education, even from students that rank it second just behind the arts. And one little thing that most people don't know when they talk about STEM job growth is that the majority of STEM job growth, new job growth, will actually be in computing. So when you think about STEM, the key priority and the key problem is actually computer science. There's no C in STEM, by the way. It's kind of like a T thing, but it's a little different. Anyway. So let's talk a little bit more about the teacher capacity issue. 24,000 math science teaching degrees were earned in 2015. From those same universities, 75 computer science teaching degrees nationally. So there's a huge dearth of computer science teachers. What we've done at Codeorg is rather than depend on the pre-service pipeline, we worked with in-service teachers and built their capacity to teach a period or 2 or 3 of computer science. And so, not surprisingly, only 35% of high schools nationally really teach computer science, and that's just a high school figure. And so the problem we deal with, just like Evan said, is how do you train enough teachers to teach computer science? Because you need a teacher to teach computer science. And how do you train teachers who actually don't know computer science? I told you this is a perfect storm. So there is currently not enough computer science education in schools. So that means that the adults didn't get it when they were younger. So then how do they teach something that they don't know, let alone didn't get a degree in? Even more so, how do you provide ongoing support? Because obviously we know that's important. And then like Evan said, in terms of building local capacity and not just taking some national team and swooping in and then leaving, how do you build capacity in those local communities? So what we do at Codeorg, because we believe that every student in every school deserves the opportunity to learn computer science, is that we offer free curriculum, K-12. We have a big machine around professional learning, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. We do a lot of promotion. This is actually National Computer Science Education Week, and hundreds of thousands of kids, in fact, millions of kids internationally, are doing an hour of code. And some of them are dancing, some of them are playing games, some of them are doing things off the computer even. And lastly, which I spend a lot of my time on right now, we do a lot of policy work to cement but also drive a lot of the innovation happening in school districts. So the teacher experience is a pretty traditional one. What's not traditional is the fact that it goes on into the academic year locally with usually four one-day workshops that are quarterly, along with online supports. And some of the results from our PD experiences is that 92% of teachers agree that it was the absolute best PD that they've ever had. And the secret to our success is this teacher-learner-observer model, which basically is like a micro-teaching thing where teachers actually get in and teach the curriculum rather than sit there and just learn from a PowerPoint. It's really active. And so we work with regional partners like the Oklahoma Public Schools Resource Center. We work with a trainer network of 400 plus trainers nationwide to do everything that we do. And in 2018, 70 plus of our regional partners, including that group from Oklahoma, ran over 600 workshops for more than 4,000 teachers. Over the last 5.5 years, we PD'd almost 100,000 teachers internationally, about 87,000 of those in the US, trained by 400 plus facilitators. And another secret to our model, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, is how we train facilitators. So I just wanted to provide this graphic up here, and maybe we can go back to it later, but basically the summary of it is that, you know, if a teacher matters for students, the facilitator matters for teachers. And so we spend a lot of time building the capacity of these facilitators through online support, through and gradually just building their capacity to lead full-on workshops. Lastly, our results. So our student results, there are 30 million plus students on Codeorg. 45% of them are female, which if you know anything about computer science is a pretty big deal. 48% are underrepresented minorities because we actually focus on those schools. And lastly, 49% of students are on free and reduced meals. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks, Pat. So Megan, in Vail, you guys have the really innovative teacher preparation program that's happening as a result of some of the state law changes. And I think some of us have probably heard something about Arizona SB 1042, but maybe you could tell us what that is and then what it's allowed you to do in Vail and the work that you're doing.
Great. Thank you, Evan. Just to introduce myself again, my name is Megan Cloud, and I'm the Director of Professional Development in the Vail School District. I've been with the Vail School District, which, by the way, is in Arizona. A lot of times people are like, Vail, Colorado? No, no. I've been with the Vail School District for 30 years. I was a classroom teacher for half of those years, and I now come up and have the opportunity to work with all the new teachers in our district under the curriculum department. For those of you who have not heard about Vail, let me just give you some brief stats on that. Vail was founded in 1903, and it covers almost about 425 square miles. We currently have over 15,000 students, and we have 740 teachers. We are a rapidly growing district. When I started in Vail 30 years ago, we had one school. It was K-8. We sent our high school students to other districts. And now you can see up there how many schools we have. We have almost 20 and building them almost every other year still. We hire close to 150 teachers, new teachers, every year. The other thing I would like you to know about Vail is over 95% of our schools, elementary to high school, have received an A rating from ADE. That's far greater than any percentage of a similarly sized district or even larger districts in Arizona. So the things I wanted to talk about a little today with you is just the reality of the issue. There is a teacher shortage, and how do we get more teachers in the occupation? I'll talk a little about SB 1042, if you're not familiar with it. And then I also want to just, from a perspective, and we certainly don't have all the answers. We don't have a silver bullet. I wish we did that would fix everything. But I'll tell you what we have learned over the past couple of years and our systems that we have put in place to work with alternative certification teachers, and then just some takeaways. In 1617, the Arizona Republic, and I know the Washington Post is huge here. The Arizona Republic is our huge newspaper, and they did a study and collected some data, and you see that up on the slide. This study really painted the picture for that there were warm bodies in the classroom teaching our students. One of the other interesting facts about this study is that the year before, according to ADE, Arizona Department of Education, they did a little research and found that 1/5 of the state's teachers left the profession in the first 2 years, and I'm sure that's not surprising. I'm sure many of you knew that. The other interesting point about this is when the Arizona Republic came out with this article in 2016, 2017, they found that 42% of those teachers had left the profession already. Almost half had left the profession. How do we retain quality teachers? How do we get quality teachers, first off? So those of you who are familiar with the Senate Bill 1042, the passing of this allowed us in Vail to broaden our teacher applicant pool. We were now, for one of the first years in our district, for almost 10, 12 years, we started the school year, and we start in July, by the way, we started the school year fully staffed with quality teachers. A little more about the Senate bill. In the last year, when we first started working with alternative certification teachers, we hired 153 teachers, 43 of them were alternative pathway teachers. And this year, we hired about 139 new teachers, all needing to be trained And we had about 28 so far, and we're only halfway through the year. I want to just stop for a second and tell a story about one of these alternative pathway teachers, because you might be wondering what experiences do they bring. Certainly they need support, and I'll talk more about that. But one of the examples of a pathway teacher that we had in our classrooms was a 5th grade teacher. And he had been in law enforcement, border patrol, for 5 years before he decided he wanted to make a difference with students. We hired him last year, young gentleman. We worked with him, and surprising, but maybe not surprising, he actually ended up having the highest 5th grade scores in the district. He was in border patrol for 5 years before he got into education. And we weren't worried in the district about classroom management for him. Yeah, he had that down. But he adopted our systems that we have in place in Vail and had the highest scores in 5th grade. So what have we learned the past couple of years? And what can you kind of take away from this? Alternative pathway teachers miss student teaching. And coming from the classroom and having 15 years in the classroom, student teaching, whether you have a good experience or a bad experience, is important. You learn so much in that student teaching. So we realized that all our alternative pathway teachers didn't have that experience. They had great other experiences. But when working with these teachers, one of the things that we found is how important connections are, how important relationships are. They need to have somebody on campus, a go-to person. We also found out that they need intensive support that first month in the school year. They need it for skill development, where they are having help or support with classroom management, because we know how important classroom management is. You can't have instruction without classroom management. We also realized that, and we have a very strong, ongoing new teacher induction program in our district, where teachers come at the beginning of the year, really in their summer vacation, and they come throughout the year. And we realized that that is critical with these teachers that we're talking about who don't have the traditional type of experience, but it's not enough. They need more. They need more support. And we have a strong coaching model in our district in Vail. We have cognitive coaches, we have literacy coaches, we have math coaches. Not a lot of teachers leave our district going, we didn't get any support. They might leave and say, we got a lot of support. But we also found that our model, it didn't always work with alternative pathway teachers, because some of those alternative pathway teachers, they didn't know enough to know what they're not knowing. And so a reflective model didn't work. So in Vail, one of the things that our system for the past 2 years has included is that we had our principals tell us what are their struggling teachers and what are they struggling with. And then we had district coaches at the district level work with these people almost every day for the first month that they're in the classroom. We moved from that reflective model to a direct coaching model with our alternative pathway teachers. And then we made some new modifications for new teacher induction. We have new teacher induction half days throughout the year. For alternative pathway teachers, they came full day. But they didn't come for one of the, I'm going to sit down and watch a PowerPoint. They went into classrooms for a half day and watched what other teachers were doing in those classrooms. And then we also did a tiered support system with them, which worked on classroom management first. And when they had that down, we'll move on to instruction. And when you have that down, we'll move on to something else. So this is just what we've learned and what we've put in place the past 2 years, working with alternative certification teachers. I could put up 40-some pictures of our teachers that have alternative certification for you. And I've even told you a story about one, and we have other stories about them as well. But you see some of the things that we've learned, and I don't want you to walk away thinking we don't love our traditionally trained teachers. We love them as well. They actually make up a bulk of our highly performing staff. But we also realize, and now we have the opportunity with Senate Bill 1042 to bring in highly qualified people. Some of them are parents from our own district. Some of them are Raytheon, which is a huge engineering opportunity. We bring in those types of teachers as well. We realize that whether they're an alternative pathway teacher or they are a traditionally trained teacher, that their salaries are too low. One of the reasons that they're not coming into the program. But we do appreciate and we do try to support those alternative certification teachers who don't have their student teaching, because they provide such a diversity to our teachers. When our teachers collaborate, they bring those experiences that they have, the success that they've had in non-teaching jobs.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
So let's dive in. So what I heard here is, starting with Megan, that there isn't a single way to build great teachers, that traditional pathways are not the only way to get them into the classroom. I also heard that even if they're in the classroom, we can build a whole new set of skills around computer science or maybe some other topic that they might not know very much. I also heard that teacher diversity is critical, and that we have a huge gap. So Tequila, I'd love to come to you and come back to this. Where are you seeing success outside of your own program at bringing more diversity into the classroom? And what, for the legislators in the room or for the advocates in the room, what should we be doing to expand on the success that is happening in places around the country?
Sure, thank you. So there are lots of places that are actually doing good work here. And I will tell you what they're doing, I think, to highlight them. One of the things that they're doing is actually looking at their data. And I say that it's kind of a no-brainer, but it's interesting across the country how many states and districts don't know the extent of their problem. And so getting a better analysis and understanding of like what the context of the problem you're trying to solve for first. I was in one state last year, for example, they had introduced, they were not seeing their student achievement drive, and so they wanted teachers to have more content knowledge. We all know the importance of that. And so they had introduced legislation saying, oh, teachers must get more content knowledge, what literally equated to having a master's degree. We've looked at all the data. Having a master's degree in a non-content area doesn't correlate to student outcomes. And so that state, which is actually near here, started losing a lot of teachers to the other states. And so if you think about what problem you're trying to solve for in your pipeline programs, it's really important to understand the context of the problem. I shared that example. So what some of the other states are doing that are actually some innovations here, they're connecting it to a workforce issue. And I was a school social worker, so I'm really excited about this piece. In the area of the country where I live, whenever a new company comes to town, like manufacturing, welding, all hands on deck, right? It's an economic development issue, it's a workforce development. So the local college, the community college sets up and they're training welders, right? There has been a teacher shortage in our country for years, right? But we don't see that all hands on deck trying to address it. So some of the rural areas, Tennessee, I know is looking at this, Baltimore is looking at it, seeing it more as a workforce development issue. You have a pipeline and a ready talent pool that lacks the skills, But if you tap into that and think about the on and exit ramps for our profession, you actually have a population. So for example, a paraprofessional program, they've been around for a while, right? People have heard about them, they've tried. What's interesting, when you start to dig into that and understand what are some of the true barriers that have kept some of our paraprofessionals from advancing in the career profession, you find out many of them have not had, math. And so you stick them in the ever-churning remedial math cycle and they never get out of it, right? So instead of approaching it that way, why not ground the content training the same way you would actually train students? Because in essence, these are paraprofessionals whose entry into the career is actually similar to what many of their students may have, and especially middle school. And so if you think about training them that way, grounded in the curriculum, similar, I think, to what you were saying with code versus some theoretical approach that actually isn't grounded in the curriculum, and you're going to have to just reteach them anyway, you're actually screening people out needlessly because you're going to have to then retrain them. So those are just a couple of examples of some innovations that we're seeing out in the field.
Cool, let's build off that. Pat, so I've never seen 92% of people that like anything that much, so first, congratulations. Second, what are you doing in your upskilling of teachers that you see as working? You talked about some of the things. And then on the back end, how are you assessing to determine it's working? And I guess I asked this question for computer science, but how would you expand it to other content areas that we also know we have shortages in?
So there are some particular things that are specific to computer science. So one thing, well, I guess actually this is not specific to computer science. So here's the thing. We're taking teachers from science, math, history, English backgrounds, and then building their skills to teach computer science. And so what we want in the end is students learning computer science, not a teacher who knows how to teach computer science. So one of our key metrics of success is that teacher teaching computer science come the fall. And actually we find that about it hovers around 85%, I'd say, maybe 83%. 83 to 85% of these teachers are teaching a class come fall, which is wonderful. That's good bang for the buck, right? What's even more wonderful is that amongst our regional partners who are doing their own local workshops, that percent is actually very similar. So whether the teacher goes to a national hub to get trained or they go to a local workshop, they are in the end teaching computer science. And one of the things that we do there is just we make sure that the administration's on board. Because again, this is new to specific to computer science. You have a situation where someone is trying to insert a new thing into the K-12 menu. So obviously you need administrative support. You just can't have a teacher going rogue. And if the teacher does go rogue, it's probably going to get quashed at some point anyway. Now, in terms of how do we get so many teachers to say that this is the best PD that they've ever taken? I mean, we don't just sit there and teach them computer science. We get them teaching computer science. So kind of like what Tequila was saying, we give them the curriculum, they get into groups, and they actually teach one another the lessons. And so we actually cover a bunch of bases that way. Teachers need to build content knowledge, so they're acting as students, and they also get to experience what students are experiencing so that they can obviously understand what their own students are going to be experiencing. The teachers go straight into the content by learning how to teach it. I mean, if I want you all to learn a new topic, the best way to do it, right, would be to tell you, hey, you're going to teach this in about 2 hours. And you're going to really be motivated to learn that content. And so in the same way, we do that with our teachers.
Great. And Megan, in Vail, you guys had the benefit of this new state law that allowed you to innovate in this way. For other states that are thinking about, we have shortages, we need faster ways to get people into our classrooms, what about the law is working? What allowed it to work for you? And for others, what should they be thinking about of maybe ways to tweak it and improve it, or risks that the law has created?
Thank you. As I said before, the law has opened up that applicant pool. We can, and not only has it broadened that applicant pool, but the experiences that they're bringing in, the success that they're bringing in from another field is huge. I think the other thing the law did was we don't look at it as it put barriers in place for a school district. We looked at it, we have out-of-the-box thinkers in our district, and we looked at it that it actually removed those barriers. because then you were able to hire quality people, not just warm bodies, and put them in front of our students. Those outside experiences help at staff meetings as well. They bring like a fresh perspective. I think about the stories that the Border Patrol agent who came to and taught 5th grade, what he would share with his students. And not only did he score, of course, the highest, but he was respected by his the parents of the students loved him. I think alternative pathway programs help districts or put people in what they should be doing. These teachers have very unique skills that they can bring. So it's working for us, and I can only speak how we're doing it in Vail and some of the things that we're working. If another state were to do something like this, those teachers need support. And you saw some of the things on the slide that you put in place, that the relationship piece. They need a person on campus they can go to. They also need that skill development that we were talking about before as well. Not just a new teacher induction program, but they need this is what you need to do now, and this is what you need to do now, and this is what you need to do now.
Great. So I'm going to ask one other question, but I want everybody here to start thinking about your questions, and I'm going to come to you. So Tequila, I'll come back to you. So Pat talked a little bit about, here's a curriculum, and we know this is high quality, and that way we can focus on helping you deliver it. In your guys' opportunity myth, one of the things you talked a lot about was making sure we have grade level content. So when you think about bringing teachers into the workforce, what are the things that you prioritize in training them so that if they come through an alternative pathway or traditional pathway, so that they're ready on day one?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the things in our training programs, we actually focus both on content. So it's not a question of either or, with content and rigor, or like making sure that the lessons are culturally relevant and making sure that there's good classroom management. Both of those things have to be true. So what we do when we train our teachers, we set them up teaching them just the routines to actually effectively manage and run a classroom, but that has to be grounded in the assumption that you're going to deliver to them a content and a curriculum that's grounded in high quality instruction. And so if the teacher has to take the guesswork out of like, here's grade appropriate content and grade appropriate work, and you've given them the tools to know how to implement that and facilitate that process, then that's when learning can actually occur. What we're seeing too much of, many teachers come out of their, whether it's traditional or alt route, their programs not having a good understanding of how to implement a solid curriculum, and then they get to their schools, and many schools and districts unfortunately don't have grade appropriate curriculum in place. So it's like the teachers are they're dead in the water before they get started. So we actually try to think about working with districts to make sure they're adopting solid materials, but then really focusing on helping the teacher know how to implement those by having the routines, the structures in place to do that.
Great. So let's open it up to some questions. We'll start here.
Great Georgia. And I guess my question is for Dr. Browning. And I was reluctant to ask this question, being African American, but I figured there's some folks in here that probably want to ask that same question. They just didn't feel it appropriate to do it. So I'll ask. And I was looking at slide 1 where you were talking about the disparities between African American teachers and the fact that a student is more likely to learn from a person that looks like he or she. But my question is, you also talked about the licensure, and you talked about the disparities in that, and you said something, if I'm not correct, that had to do with maybe amending the way the licenses are issued. Now, my question is, are you suggesting, in theory, by opinion, or factually, are you suggesting that we amend the license and certification process to accommodate minorities so that we can increase the amount of minorities in the process? And I'm sure there's some other folks in there that say, wait a minute, that sounds a little bit like affirmative actions on another level. So would you help us out with that?
I will. Thank you so much for your question. I am absolutely saying to revisit your licensure practices. I'm not saying revisit them in order to only have minority teachers. I'm saying that the current licensure practices that we have are not yielding the outcomes that we want. So, and that's for teachers irrespective of their race. There's no correlation, or there's minimal correlation, it's not consistent between licensure exams and teacher effectiveness, which yields student outcomes. That's irrespective of race. Now, what I'm saying that if the tool that you're using to screen teachers out is not getting you the outcome that you want, like insanity says doing the same thing and expecting different results, why not reconsider that process, figure out a better process to screen candidates to get them into the classroom? Especially, we do see the importance that the diversity of teachers has for all students, and I want to be clear here. Diversity of teachers actually, all students actually do better with a more diverse workforce, not just students of color. The final thing that I'll say is that and there are ways to do that. In our own training, we don't screen out by licensure exams. We actually use performance-based screens. So we take the teacher through their initial year. Throughout the year, they're continuing to get training and coaching, but throughout that process, we do performance-based assessment of their progress, and then we screen them out there versus through an exam. And what we've seen is that actually correlates better to student outcomes versus just a licensure exam. I would love to talk as well.
Let's keep going. Let's go right here in the front. Jason.
Hi, Jason Botel with Catapult Learning. I just want to take that question and I want to push just a little further, and I think you were going there, Tequila, but I just want to make sure. My question is there any value add to having standard licensure requirements? Or should we simply allow schools and school systems to, as you were saying, rigorously evaluate, have a thorough screening process, but not a this test, that course? And I feel like that's the logical conclusion of what many of you are saying. And I'll just say from my own experience, having been a principal, and just one quick anecdote, I ran charter schools in Baltimore. I had a teacher, African-American woman. She, 2 years in a row, led our students to get the highest math scores in the city of Baltimore, some of the best in the state. She continually failed to pass the practice. I was told I had to take her out of the classroom. She had the best scores in the city, some of the best in the state, with very high poverty rate. And that experience and this conversation, to me, it's like, why do we have licensure requirements? Why not let our schools and our school districts just screen people based on performance and an interview process, et cetera?
Are you ready to go that far? No licensure. Let us assess in schools.
So the issue, I think, is when we think about the scale. So, I mean, if you as a principal, you had the tools and resources to be able to do that, to screen, to adequately screen where there's not implicit or explicit bias. It's not just, who stays after school most for you, who's running more clubs for you. If there is a way at scale to do performance and we have the people and resources to do that, then I would absolutely unequivocally say, sure, get rid of all of the licensure exams. We can't do that at scale. So there is a place for licensure and for exams, but it has to yield the outcomes that we want. The problem is right now the current licensure exams not always, but they don't consistently correlate to the outcomes that we want. So when we figure out how to do it at scale without any, sure, then I would say get rid of them. We're not there yet, but we need more consistent way to gauge the performance on the front end.
And what I would add to that, if I can, is I think licensure exams are particularly helpful in specific content areas. And this sort of goes to what Pat is doing at Codeorg, is by going really deep on a specific content area, teachers are much more prepared to teach that. So for high school physics, high school chemistry, we actually see that a higher correlation between those licensure exams and passing them and actually student achievement. So in some cases it is a better barometer, but for an elementary school teacher taking the praxis, or for a middle school teacher, I would agree that the exam is not the measure. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have any measure, but it does beg the question, what should those be? Let's go one more question back here.
Anna Thompson, Barbara Hill Advisors. On the theme of a sort of appropriate salary and attracting more people to the field, can you talk about the history of class size mandates over the last 30 years and how that with increase in students has impacted the sort of macro picture about being able to offer competitive salaries to attract more people?
Does anybody want to talk about the 30 years of class? I'm just kidding. That's a big question. What I will say on that is you're absolutely right. So some states have put in place class size mandates that have dramatically increased the number of teachers that are teaching in that state to be able to meet those class size requirements. And the data on reducing class size is mixed. It shows that reducing class size can help, but it is not the biggest factor in improving student achievement. And as a result of that, there are fewer dollars spread across more teachers that could have an impact on reducing teacher salaries. Certainly not the only thing reducing teacher salaries. We also see in many states the weights of pension systems that have been underfunded for a long time, drawing dollars out of the classroom. We've also seen some states that through the recession have not increased their funding back to where it was before. So part of it is more money actually needs to be put in. Part of it is when we have a one-size-fits-all class size mandate, when we know that class sizes are actually much more important in early childhood than it might be in a high school math class that might be better taught to a larger group of students. So with the lack of flexibility at the school, it's compounded the problem that you raised. Maybe we can do one or two more questions, unless anybody wants to add to that.
Well, the only other thing I would add is if that's not the lever, I mean, class size isn't the thing that drives. I mean, if you think about the compensation and you think about retention, which is ultimately what it's trying to drive, class size isn't the thing that does that. The flexibility that Evan is talking, and there are some states, I know in Tennessee, for example, where they actually have done away with some of the class size mandates to allow districts to have more innovative practices, to create like teacher leader roles, right, where a teacher has a responsibility for more students, but that was an effective teacher, and maybe another teacher's like an assistant or something. So I would say it's the innovation that can be driven by freeing up the restrictions from those dollars.
Sure.
Good. Hi, Ira Paul from Miami-Dade County, Florida. And my question is, to eliminate barriers, one of the biggest barriers I see is the way teachers are treated and paid. For one instance, you can have any school district you walk into, you can have, in one room, you can have a highly effective teacher. In another classroom, you can have the least effective teacher, yet they get paid the same. If teaching is supposed to be a profession, why can't we be treated like professionals instead of blue-collar workers? And that's my question.
Thanks.
I love that question. Does anybody want to take it? Are you guys doing anything in Vail that differentiates compensation, or is it all on a standard salary scale structure?
We actually do give an incentive for some of our math and science teachers at the high school level, which I know you were speaking about, that there should be that differentiation.
So what I will say to your question is, for a long time, I think everybody has agreed with that and said, well, how do we know? How do we know who the great teachers are? I agree with you. You can walk into a building and ask the other teachers there, or the students, or the parents, and they generally know. You know, I was in a building where the parents fought really hard to have students in Miss Livingston's class over Miss Greenlee's class. No, sorry, Miss Greenlee. But parents knew, right? Parents knew, other teachers knew, but we've had a long and ongoing debate about how do we actually measure teacher quality and do that well. And we heard Dr. Chetty talk about test scores as one valuable measure, but I actually think there have been lots of unfortunate outcomes of overweighting test scores as our sole measure, and we know that that can only measure 30 to 35% of teachers. So I do think there's a good question about how do we better assess teacher quality, not just in order to reward them, but also to help them grow and develop, which I think goes back to this question of what's happening in Vail, which is you guys are differentiating the supports for your teachers because you really know and understand what they each need. The Border Patrol worker that you described, he came in with classroom management skills and needed help on some of the other tactics.
Right.
So can you talk about what it takes to be able to identify the actual concrete needs of each teacher in terms of capacity, or how you've set up the district to do that?
Absolutely. One of the fortunate things that we have in our district that I know, Evan, you talked about was that leadership piece. So we have coaches, as I said, that go in, and these are classroom teachers that get paid extra to coach. They go in and they're trained, and they know specifically what to look for and what to give feedback on. Our alternative pathway teachers, because they needed that support that first month, We moved to a direct coaching model where, as I said before, you go into those classrooms, you assess what they need. The teacher I spoke about didn't need classroom management, but he did need some questioning kind of things to work on. So we have this tiered support model to work with those teachers, where the coach goes in, looks at what is the teacher doing effectively, and then what are some things that they can work on. And a direct coach is pretty matter of fact about it. Here's what you're doing well. Here's some things we're going to work on, and I'm coming in again in a couple of days, and I'm going to look for those.
So we need to wrap up, and EIE 18 is about to be trending on Twitter. It's very close. So I'm going to ask each of you for your one final recommendation for the advocates and the legislators in the room. If they were trying to increase diversity and quality while closing the gaps that we have in our teacher capacity and pipelines, what would you be telling them to work on? And we have, in a tweet length, is the goal. I'm not going to count characters, but let's be concise.
I'll just jump right into it because we got to get this thing done. Fund computer science teacher professional development at the state level. Number 2, in terms of certification, introduce a tiered system, and we can talk about that later if you want, for getting teachers provisionally certified and then fully certified in computer science. And then lastly, for more recommendations, read the 2018 State of Computer Science Education Report at bit.ly/2018 State of CS. 2018 State of CS.
Analyze your data at the district level and at the state level from all of your program providers. Treat entering the profession not as a K-12 problem, but as a workforce and economic development problem for your community. And read The Opportunity Myth, which talks about what good teachers are actually doing to actually return on our investment for students.
If you have the opportunity to have alternative pathway teachers, alternative certification pathway teachers in your district, they need support. They bring a lot of unique experiences, but I think one of the things that's important to do is to think about when you go in and evaluate any teacher, whether they're a traditional pathway teacher or an alternative pathway teacher, would you want your child in their class?
Okay, well, that's a great place to end. I have one public service announcement. Beginning at 5:30, please join ExcelinEd's first ever sponsored roundtable discussions in the Marquee Ballroom. We're fortunate enough to have these because of the support of College Board, iTeach, NWEA, Pearson, and Renaissance will be hosting table discussions on a variety of issues. You can find out more details in your app. I want to say a huge thank you to all 3 of you. This was a really great experience for me. I learned a ton. If you have questions, we might hang out around for a little bit, unless they're about either 30 years of class size history or why we treat all teachers the same. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you so much.